People were dying every single day, one after another. Families I had known for years. Children I had watched grow up. And no one, not the doctors, not the priests, not the government officials who came through wearing their fine coats and their terrified expressions, no one could stop it. Hope had not just faded. It had completely disappeared. And then, buried inside a forgotten manuscript that had not been opened in over 300 years, I found something that everyone else had overlooked. Something written in trembling ink by hands long turned to dust. A secret that would change everything. By the end of this story, you will understand why that one forgotten discovery changed thousands of lives forever. And why I almost walked right past it without a second glance. To understand how I found those forgotten pages, you first have to understand who I was before any of this happened. I entered the convent when I was 19 years old. Not because my family forced me. Not because I had nowhere else to go. I went because I genuinely believed that a quiet life of service was the most meaningful thing I could offer the world. And for many years, it truly was quiet. Beautifully, peacefully quiet. I spent my mornings in prayer, my afternoons caring for sick visitors who came to our small infirmary, and my evenings in the library. That library was my favorite place in the entire world. Floor-to-ceiling wooden shelves. The smell of old paper and candle wax. Manuscripts and ledgers and handwritten volumes stacked so deeply that some of them had not been touched in generations. I loved every single one of them. I used to tell Sister Catherine that I was convinced those old books still had things to say. She would smile politely and hand me a mop. That was her way of reminding me that devotion and practicality both had their place. I never imagined that my love for those old books would one day be the difference between life and death for an entire community. It started in the villages to the east. Word traveled slowly at first, the way it always does when people are afraid and do not yet know how afraid they should be. A strange sickness. Fever, weakness, and a kind of exhaustion so complete that grown men could barely lift their heads. Within 2 weeks, it had spread to 3 villages. Within a month, it had reached our town. I remember standing at the convent gate the morning the first family arrived seeking help. A father carrying his daughter. Her face so pale it nearly broke me in half. I looked at him and I thought, I am going to help you. I am going to figure this out. I had no idea what I was promising. But I meant every word of it. Our infirmary filled within days. Then it overflowed. We set up cots in the chapel. We gave away every herbal remedy we knew. I sent letters to a physician in the city who wrote back with suggestions that helped almost no one. The local doctor, a good man named Dr. Harlan, worked himself into a collapse trying to manage the impossible. I watched him one evening sitting in the corner of the infirmary with his head in his hands, and I realized with a cold and terrible clarity that he had run out of answers. That was the moment I understood that whatever hope existed, it was not going to come from the expected places. So I started looking in unexpected ones. I had been assigned to help restore and catalogue the archives at an old monastery on the edge of town. It had been abandoned for decades, and the church wanted the surviving documents preserved before they were lost completely to moisture and time. Most of what I found was exactly what you would expect. Property records. Old correspondence. Lists of donations. Boring, honestly. But I kept going back. I kept going back because something in me refused to believe that 3 centuries of accumulated knowledge could hold nothing useful. Then one afternoon in late November, I moved a collapsed wooden shelf to reach the back corner of the storage room. Behind it was a narrow wooden box, sealed shut with wax that had long since cracked. Inside was a single handwritten manuscript. The handwriting was uneven, almost desperate-looking in places. Like whoever wrote it had been in a tremendous hurry. I opened the first pages carefully, my hands shaking slightly from the cold and from something else I could not quite name. And I read a date in the upper margin that made me go completely still. The manuscript was over 300 years old. And the opening lines described a sickness that spread through villages. A sickness that no physician of the time had been able to stop. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I brought the manuscript back to the convent that night and I barely slept. The language was an older form of the written word, dense and difficult, full of Latin phrases and references to plants and methods I did not immediately recognize. But scattered throughout the pages was a description of a treatment. A specific combination of preparation steps involving materials that had been available for centuries. Humble things. Overlooked things. Applied in a particular way with a particular timing that the writer described in careful, almost urgent detail. Whoever had written this had watched people die too. And whoever had written this believed they had found something that worked. I showed it to Dr. Harlan the next morning. He read 3 pages, handed it back to me, and said, gently but clearly, that he could not base medical decisions on folklore. I showed it to the senior priest. He said it was likely superstition dressed in the language of medicine. I showed it to Sister Catherine. She was quiet for a long time. And then she said, "Sister, I think you believe in this." And I realized she was right. I did believe in it. Not blindly. Not without doubt. But I believed that the person who wrote those pages had witnessed something real. And I believed that dismissing them entirely without investigation was its own kind of failure. But here is where it became genuinely terrifying. Several of the most critical pages were damaged. Water had blurred entire sections. There were gaps in the instructions. Important words missing, replaced by smears of faded ink. What I could read pointed clearly toward a particular method, but what I could not read left enormous questions. I spent 4 days barely eating, barely sleeping, cross-referencing what remained with every other text in that monastery library, looking for any other document that might have borrowed language from the same source. And on the 4th day I found a single page tucked inside a completely unrelated ledger. A fragment. 7 sentences. Written in a different hand but referencing the same treatment, the same materials, the same timing. It was like finding a missing piece of a map. I still was not certain. Certainty was not something I could afford to wait for. I went back to Dr. Harlan with everything. The original manuscript, the fragment, my translations, my notes. I sat across from him and I said, "I know you cannot base decisions on folklore alone. But I am not asking you to act on folklore. I am asking you to look at this evidence and tell me it doesn't deserve a serious investigation." He was quiet for a long time. And then he asked me to walk him through it all, step by step. We worked together for the next week. He verified the botanical references. He consulted with an elderly herbalist from the next county who had spent decades studying old medicinal traditions. She recognized several elements of the preparation immediately, not as legend, as history. Real documented history that simply had not been included in the medical texts most people studied. Dr. Harlan's expression changed. Slowly. The way doubt changes when something begins to become possible. We made the decision together. A careful, controlled application of what the manuscript described, adapted with modern understanding, focused first on those who were earliest in their illness and still had the strongest chance of response. I prayed more those 3 days than I think I had prayed in the entire previous decade of my life. The first patient showed improvement in 36 hours. The second, in 2 days. By the end of the week, we had a clear pattern. Not every patient recovered. We lost people. I will carry those losses with me for the rest of my life. But the tide had turned. The progression of new cases slowed. The overwhelming flood of suffering began, just barely, to recede. And then to recede further. And then further still. When I understood it was truly working, I did not feel triumph. I felt something much quieter than that. I sat down on the floor of the monastery storage room where I had first found the manuscript and I cried for a very long time. For the ones we had saved. For the ones we had lost. For the person who had written those trembling, urgent pages 300 years before me, who had died without ever knowing that their words would one day matter again. The weeks that followed were an exhaustion I had never experienced before and have not experienced since. My body felt wrung out. My faith felt both stretched and strengthened at the same time, which is a strange thing to describe but the only honest way I know to say it. The community slowly, painfully rebuilt itself. Families came back together. Children returned to school. Dr. Harlan gave a formal account to the city medical board that drew attention from scholars and historians who came to study the manuscript in the months that followed. I let them take what they needed. That knowledge did not belong to me. It never had. What I carried away from all of it was something I have tried to put into words many times and never quite managed. I think the closest I can come is this. Hope does not always announce itself. Sometimes it is buried under 300 years of dust in a wooden box behind a collapsed shelf in a room that no one has entered in decades. And the only way it survives is if someone is willing to keep looking even after everyone else has stopped. I never imagined that one quiet nun with a love for old books would be that person. But I was. And I thank God every single day that I did not walk past that back corner without looking. I want to ask you something before you go. If you had been in my position, if everyone around you had dismissed the manuscript, if the pages were damaged and the odds were impossible and the clock was running out, would you have kept believing? Would you have kept searching? Leave your answer in the comments below. I genuinely want to know. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that hope and courage and one quiet act of perseverance can still change the world, please share it. Someone in your life might need to hear it today more than you realize. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And please, never stop looking in the forgotten corners.